Yeah. So I for today, it would be great if we could talk about this particular chapter from
Mhm.
Social Science that I actually discussed also, as I told you yesterday with this group, and it's actually quite nice to talk about it because it's quite structured and limited, actually. But quite
Let me get it up on the
super
screen.
fundamental.
Which chapter?
Yeah, I can start because I can start by just reading a little bit, if you like, and pointing you to
Do that,
what you
but
can
just
read.
which?
Yeah, it is chapter 4 from GA3, the starting point of epistemology.
Okay, great.
And I will read one paragraph, and then I will talk a little bit, and then you will remember probably because it's also, this is a very fundamental concept also in GA2, so I'm sure you will remember.
Okay.
So I will start. According to everything we have seen, investigations at the beginning of a theory of knowing, everything that already belongs to the arena of knowing must be excluded. Knowing itself is something that comes with the human condition, something arising through daily activity. If a theory of knowing is really to extend to illuminating the entire field of becoming familiar with it, of knowing concepts and ideas, then it must take as its starting point something that has remained completely untouched by this activity, from which the latter itself receives its impetus. What to begin with lies outside of knowing cannot be knowing itself. Therefore, we must look for it immediately before the familiarity of knowing, so that the very next step that the human being takes from this precursor is an activity of knowing. The way in which this absolute first is to be determined must be such that nothing that already comes from knowing, from cognition, flows into it. So now you probably remember where he's going to, because he actually put in GA2 in particular. I think GA3 is much shorter in many respects because it's a PhD thesis and he had less space or whatever. But in GA2, actually, this whole concept of the pure
Your experience.
experience, he calls it there explicitly, without knowing. Here he calls it actually the immediately given.
Yeah.
Slight different terminology, but so he kind of like tries to point us to a world that, like, how would the world look like where knowing is not yet present. And I think this is an interesting concept that I would like to talk about a little bit with you, like, because the way I see it is that it's basically, you can only point towards it because it's actually impossible to imagine such a world, because we are basically limited by by knowing.
Can I have?
Yeah.
I think, but there are lots of ways in which we can begin to get a feeling for it.
Yeah, a pointer towards. Yeah, I agree, but sure, let's go ahead.
A contemplation of the animal world.
Like how animals experience the world, you mean? Or
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not sure, because animals have consciousness and they also have a certain mental processing still. So animals have an inner world, and animals have an inner representation of the world, like going from pretty advanced to having a couple of brain cells. So there is a huge scope there, but there is still always an inner representation in the brain. Animals have brains. That's the difference between animals and plants. So maybe it's even going to how a plant would experience the world is coming maybe even closer.
Yes. Yeah. And I think when I've had these types of conversations before, I think people have understood this challenge by Steiner as sort of like, we've got to try and live in that moment. And whereas what you're saying is, no, this is a pointer, and that's where I think this is right, that we can live ourselves into this idea of what experience must be like if I don't have thinking. I can't go back to that stage, but I can, in my thinking, in my imagination, I can imagine what the world looks like because I see lots of examples of it.
But do you think you can imagine? Because is that not the moment that you imagine it? It is already your thinking that does the imagination. So then you are already screwed, basically. So it's already not it's basically by definition not possible.
No, I think this is the purpose of meditation. It is to be able to live. And when I say the purpose, it's like one of the things that you are slowly developing. It's like as you get deeper into the meditative practice, you're able to live into something and let it talk to you. But it's not you imposing your thoughts on it.
You try to strip off the concepts that are known, familiar.
See, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. But then something remains. So what is that then? So that is still, like you could, if you just look, even if you look at something in the world like a tree, you can strip off all concepts. You can strip off everything you know about a tree. You can even try to strip off the fact that it's an object in an outside world, like trying to merge it with the rest of the world. But there is always something remaining, right? That is what I mean. So it will always be a pointer. That's what I mean. It's like you can never get to the point where nothing and nothing is also already a concept, if you know what I mean. So it's like, it feels a bit like a paradox almost.
If we take the example with tree, and this isn't this, when I say this isn't to like argue that you have achieved it, but it is if walking through a forest, you imagine, first of all, you take your knowledge, you take your conceptual knowledge, and you think about the sap that's rising and creating all that growth. You can take that knowledge and then live into it to experience what is happening there, what forces must be inherent that are somehow invisible. And when I do that, it's like myself becomes, it's the means, but I lose myself into the experience. And perhaps another thing to add here is that all phenomena is, the way I understand Steiner, it is thinking imbued will. It's spiritual activity that can be understood with thinking. So it is always there in experience. It's just we in a primal state, I remember talking about it in these terms with Jeff, actually, that one way of understanding what Steiner is encouraging us to do in both here and in Philosophy of Freedom, it's a returning to paradise moment.
Yeah.
So like that virginal state where.
Yeah. That's very interesting and now you start to connect epistemology to esoteric knowledge and even religion, or so that's very yeah. I mean, it's kind of like it's a great go on. It's a great step, but I mean, he's not talking about this in this book, of course. But
No, but I think when you begin to live into, it's like, what is this immediately given? He's, depending on which lens you want to view it through, he's sort of like saying, like in cold philosophical terms, this is what you need to do. But when you live with your, you don't just think about it, you experience it. You seem to be performing this reintegration of the paradise, let's call it moment, or the paradise part of our history into your own experience, but at a thinking level. But as we know, our goal is not just to return to paradise unchanged. It's like the reason we incarnate is to understand ourselves, to experience ourselves as free spiritual beings. It's like as agents.
Yeah.
And so that's the difference. It's helping us to remind us where we've come from, but not to, when we read the philosophy read and think, oh God, right, so all I've got to do is sort of like try to rub out all my knowledge.
Yeah, to immerse in everything, to disappear.
Exactly.
In this yeah, you can call it chaos, like the nothingness.
Yeah.
It disappear in nothingness, because then I'm back in paradise, indeed.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you say. You say you lose yourself when you try to describe what you experience in nature. That you lose yourself in the outer world, and I
Or
think
you
this is
forget yourself.
yeah. Well, it's not lose. So there's a subtle, because
Yeah.
that is indeed, you don't mean you don't want to lose, but still there is a certain losing going on. You lose maybe something of yourself. That's the stripping away, right, from the
Yes.
concepts also. But indeed, something must remain also of yourself. But this is okay. First of all, maybe we can agree that if you want to indeed reach this, of go towards this experience of this world before knowing, it is actually not possible with the normal consciousness and normal thinking. Maybe that is, and that, in that sense, you can ask yourself, is this the terrain of philosophy, right? Is because if you understand philosophy just as thinking, as the most philosophers do, is as abstract thinking, like logic, like, right,
Yep.
rationality.
Yep.
Maybe we can accept that if you stick to thinking like that, it's only a pointer. But then if you indeed allow a change of consciousness, a change of thinking, then you can go much further towards that. But then basically you're gonna change rules. So you're gonna change constitution. You're gonna change, and then it becomes a bit like a vague area, like what's possible there, and how can you convince philosophers about this, for example, if you don't experience it indeed, or if you don't go there. So but anyway, so then but if you go there, it indeed it has to do something with the change of your thinking, but also your relationship indeed, like something like what comes to my mind is now also what happens if you take hallucinogen drugs, for example. I don't know if you have experiences with that, but that is also really literally what he describes here, that literally the concepts are stripped away from objects. So yesterday I had someone describing an hallucinogen trip. There was a very intense but short DMT trip, and she said, I forgot who I was. This is so extreme. You do not only forget what a leaf, if you look at a leaf, you don't recognize the leaf anymore. You don't know that it's a leaf anymore. So that is kind of like really close to this moment where knowing is not present, because you don't even if you do an effort, you don't know it. But even it went that far that she doesn't know who she is, So, and that is also maybe a state where you want to reach for. On the other hand, on drugs, it's more losing yourself, really losing yourself, because you do not have any control, and it can be totally an horrifying experience. You can become schizophrenic, or you can get into psychosis, exactly because, well, you want to know who you are, right? If you don't know who you are, how can you function? But this DMT trip is very short, and you don't have to do anything, so you can just really be there and lose yourself for a moment. But yeah, you cannot live, of course, if you do not know who you are. So my idea is that indeed, if you do it by
Can I ask a
consciousness,
question there? Was her memory of this experience, was it like very clear when she was describing it? Or
yeah, this is very, very. It was.
that's interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting, isn't it?
It's like she told it as if it was the normalest thing in the world. Although she is not very experienced, but she told it like, yeah, that she was constantly in this trip trying to remember, who am I? Who? And my experience also is that if you take this and you're, especially with a long trip, your world is so turned upside down. Indeed, nothing is the same. And at a certain point, you lose your identity, because your identity is how you observe the world, right? And then these trips can take a long time, so you're totally exhausted. You want to sleep. It's the morning comes, but it doesn't stop. It takes sometimes 10 hours before you get back to normal. So then, actually, what I experience is an immense longing for my old self. And because what you are at that moment, it feels very, it's totally creative, because you experience everything in a total. There's no limits to it, but this no limits is very terrifying, actually, because, well, if everything can be anything, well, you also, what are you indeed? Like what? Like there is nothing to cling on to, hang on to, basically. So the moment that you feel, I really literally felt myself coming back. So the world becoming slowly normal again. Like, this is how I used to experience a leaf, and it's actually coming back now. And this was like, wow, I'm so happy that I and that is actually great, because you start to also really value normal life again. Like, wow, this is what I am, and yes, this is what I want to be, because I don't want to be lost in all the infinite possibilities that are out there, because it's totally scary.
This is it's really good what you're saying, because we can actually connect it to what we only touched upon in our meditation group about dreams, because both you and Carsten were under the impression that Steiner hasn't talked much about dreams, but he has, and it's particularly relevant to what you're talking about here. He says one way he would describe dreams is they are the after effects of what it's like living in the spiritual world. And so when we experience the chaos and the utter creativity, etc., in our dreams, what we are doing is we have left that part of ourselves behind that does find reason and order. It's like in the world, and predictability, because that isn't there. The spiritual world is of a fundamentally different nature. It's not about there's not this rationale that we understand it on this plane. He talks about there is a moral rationale. It's what the will does is the truth there, type of thing. If we don't think our way to the truth, the will is the arbiter of reality there. And if we don't have a will, and we see all of these different wills sort of like doing their own thing, we live in this chaos without any anchor. And when we wake up in the morning, it's like, if we remember our dreams, we can experience it's like this chaos as a mini memory of what you would, a less intense version of what you were describing there. It's like, this is something completely otherworldly, but dreams, well, in dreams obviously they can be scary, but they don't have this they don't need to
Compelling.
have this
Well,
exactly.
because you're not completely aware and you're normally you wake up or something, but dreams can also be scary, right? I mean, that is
Absolutely.
yeah.
And this is the fascinating thing that, I mean, this week I woke up. My alarm clock goes off at 5:20, and I put it on snooze, and I managed to fall back asleep. And I had this sort of like whole stream of dreams, and I know it was only in those 5 minutes.
Wow.
And you're still, when you take that type of experience, you know you've had it. You don't have to believe somebody else's version of it. And a little bit like this woman who's sort of like, or this person who's like, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? And in that, because it's a personal experience, it's like it gains a certain intensity as to what is it that lives in me or through me that is capable of producing all of that experience
in such
in
a short
5 minutes.
Yeah.
So all I wanted to do there, or my purpose of describing that, was to connect that dreams interpreted in a certain way are analogical to like a full-on DMT experience. Not in intensity, but it's like in the essential nature of the loss of self. It's there until we begin to wake up in our dreams, of course.
Yeah. I think also experiencing the spiritual world is basically allowing some of that etheric world, however you want to call it, to enter. But it can enter in small bits and pieces, so to say. So controllable and also not compelling. Like, is compelling the right word? Dwingen.
Absolutely, yeah.
It's not like it's like if you take DMT and you look at the leaf, you cannot go back to the normal version, if you know what I mean. And so you have to. It's also actually a great meditation because you have to learn to surrender basically completely, right? And to trust the experiences. Okay, this is fine. And also, I will become normal again. This is actually an important notion, because if you start to doubt about that, which is actually one of the biggest fears I had, is that you really start to seriously doubt, will I ever become normal again? Because you're completely gone. So who'd ever told you that? And some people never become normal actually again, or they get flashbacks, or anyway. So it's kind of like a risky area. But so if I have a little experience, like if I listen to the wind and I experience something that feels like into the etheric, it's kind of like it's control. It's like I'm in control also. Maybe too much still. So I think it's also allowing to let control go will maybe let me go deeper even. So I think this letting go of control is part of probably the meditation. And it also has to do with letting go of the fear. Actually, like the next chapter we are now reading, it says literally, I will quote, because I'm writing something about it. Wait 1 second. It's materialism as a psychic phenomenon of fear is an important chapter in the science of the soul. So it's a fear for the spiritual world, basically.
Yes.
That keeps us from at a distance. This is very, very crucial, I think, because we developed this fear also due to all kind of things like dreams, but also these kind of like drugs experiences, I think, for some people, but also many elements maybe in life where you start to lose control, even fear for the dark, like if you walk in the dark, or like what are you afraid of actually? You're afraid of unknown things which are not material maybe, or which are because you're not afraid of a tree. No, you're afraid of something in the dark. That's like nowadays it's just all in horror movies, so we hardly need to use our imagination for it.
Yeah.
But in the past, I think this was really, and in the past people actually could see still also elementals, which were sometimes nasty. But anyway, the fear plays an important role to stop us and to not let go. So fear for the chaos.
Yeah.
I don't know if you also how you relate to this chaos that we are actually still. That's where we started this discussion, like the pointing towards this. You can on the one hand call it paradise. On the one hand, you can also call it hell. I think these are closely related.
Yeah.
So and there is both an attraction to paradise, but also a fear for hell, maybe.
As you were describing that, one of the directions my thinking went was this emphasis that Steiner places on the importance of dead thinking. That when he describes earlier states of consciousness, people couldn't just think; they thought, felt, and experienced the will everything. So any thought was sort of like had a compelling, going back to like thousands and thousands of years, had a compelling aspect to it. It had a reality aspect to it, that whereas now we can just say that's just a thought. The way he describes it, that was impossible for a person of 3,000-4,000 years to say. It's sort of like
overwhelming.
No,
like yeah.
Exactly. It's like it's a reality out there in the world, and all I can do is suffer or experience it.
Like actually,
because
the world is compelling, right? You cannot walk away from a tree; it's there. So in that sense, it's 100% compelling.
And that's very close to the description you just gave of your friend of the leaf. It's compelling. I can't. I think the word you use, I can't not unsee it.
Yeah.
I can't unsee it. Sorry, is what you said. There is a persistence about it. Whereas if we are just living in dead thoughts, we can actually do that. It becomes a training ground where we are relieved of the, let's call it the feeling and the compelling pressure, or the volitional pressure that is normally true. It's like when we are in the spiritual worlds. And it's amazing how well that dovetails with the experiences, it's like you've been describing, that's like if we lose ourselves, and if a drug has like taken us to this state and it's not through our own volition, then we experience it. We're more likely to experience ourselves as a victim of that world, or a being compelled by that world, as opposed to I have my own volition and I am bringing it into that world full of other volitions. And I think this is part of what happens. Certainly it describes my experience. It's like as meditation develops, it's an experiential awareness that I am moving in a realm where there are lots of other things I wanting to invade my consciousness, and they are real in the sense that I can experience them, or they create pictures, or they create words. It's like, or sentences in me, but I am there at the same time. I am resisting that just passive experiencing, and I am becoming an agent. It's like a conscious agent in that world. It's it's like small step at a time. But
But
that's where
how does that agent look like? Is that similar to the agents we are in this physical world? Because we are also agents here, right? And
but this is agency exactly. I mean, the parallel is striking, but until you've actually engaged in that battle, like you were saying, you have to want to. Um, the impotence of your thinking, if you don't confront it, you'll never experience it. But when through meditative practice you do that,
what do you mean by
that
impotence? The what? The
it's like inability to actually be agential there.
impotency, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's like non-power,
Yeah, yeah.
non-powerful, impotent. And it becomes a real experience. Here is me. It's like here on the physical plane, I can go out in I can go out in the forest, I can cut down wood, I can build a house, and I can translate documents, and I can do all of these things. I know I can. But in my inner world, I'm just a victim of all of these different forces until I begin to wake up to my impotency and I start like using my will to create content in that world. Does that what I'm saying there, does that in it's really interesting how you framing it through this, your own experiences and this person's DMT experiences, how it sort of like adds a descriptive layer, an ability to talk about it. So when I'm describing like from my own experience, does that sort of like somehow map back into your own experiences?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm just thinking about still this agency so the agency in this world, our own agency in this world also changes, transforms, right, with the spiritual path we walk. So, but the agency, one of the first things that Steiner says about, well, the first steps into imaginations, basically the first steps is basically entering the etheric world. And that is one of the first things he says is that the division between self and outer world is not so strict anymore.
Yeah,
it actually pretty much merges initially. Although he says, of course, you can still recognize, like for example, your own etheric body. If you could see it, it merges pretty much with the other etheric world, but you can still, well, identify your own etheric body. But in this chapter we are reading now with the meditation group, he actually literally says there is beings from in the etheric world that enter your eye, that are actually part of your eye and still part of the outer world. So this is almost a contradiction. It's not, there is no division. So is it me or is it the outer world? It is the same, so you kind of like have to allow this, if you know what I mean. And maybe you could say this is also more realistic in the sense that we maybe have the illusion in this playground, as you say, that that me and world are different things. And this is maybe to let the eye be born. It needs this maybe illusion of like me and world, this distinction, and that one of the first steps you make is to realize, wait a second, just like actually your own physical body, you could also say that this is an entity, but it cannot, it's nothing without the outer world. And it looks like an entity, but only if you consider your breathing, there is constant in and out going. Also, we don't see the air, so it's also a bit hidden.
Yeah.
All these things are very much hidden somehow for a reason that we also identify. Like you can also easily identify your own body as a separate entity due to this. If you could see the air flowing in and out all the time, it would already be a big difference. If you could also see all kind of other processes in your body, like how your food, for example, we don't see how food is going there. It's just something.
Yeah, that banana you ate this morning, that came from Africa. You've connected yourself with Africa or whatever.
Yeah. Anyway, you got the picture that maybe one way to an important step in the spiritual path is actually to let go of this idea of the self being an agent, how do you say, an agent independent and loose from the outside world, so to say. Yeah. Which is kind of like quite a step, because indeed you have to allow this. So you have to allow the foreigner inside your eye and yourself, or the outside world. Literally, in the etheric world, literally other spiritual beings letting enter. Anyway, so somehow if we enter the etheric, it looks like we also a bit close to this chaos that we are trying to imagine.
There's so many interesting things you're saying there. The paradox, how important it is in all religious traditions. It's trying to capture this, what we've created a duality out of something that isn't really a duality, or we only perceive it to be a duality because we perceive it from a certain way. So we might use the words micro and macrocosm, and might use them slightly loosely as intellectual concepts. But when we really live into what it truly means to be a microcosm of the macrocosm, then that all the things that seem so ridiculous to say become a statement of the obvious. I think it's really interesting if you look at the Enlightenment, and if you take arguably like Spinoza as like one of the leading figures for the beginning of the Enlightenment. If his stuff on this is beautiful. I think the book is called Emendations of the Intellect. It's like how to teach your thinking type of thing. And he describes how he meets infinity in this. It's a very short document. And I remember reading this like 2-3 years ago and being a little bit blown away by it. But if you think about these various people that like really try to battle with infinity, which is like completely paradoxical, it's like supposedly inexperienceable. It's like Steiner's immediate given, and Kant did the same. What happens is it seems to break down these strong bonds that we've got with one side of the duality. Obviously not for everybody, but it's really interesting how it also it almost seems to have this agential quality in some of these key thinkers, that confronting infinity sort of like takes you out of yourself so that you can see what yourself is. It's like it's going, we can't conceptualize, we can't imagine infinity, but trying to do it does seem to have this real effect. It's like in our way of how we understand ourselves and the world. And there was something else I wanted to because of that and other experiences, whenever I see a paradox, now I'll give you a concrete example in a second. Whenever I see a paradox or hear about paradoxes, it's if I can turn that seeming paradox into something that we should expect. If my thinking or my belief system, call it what you like, is a mixture of both, allows me to see how what seems paradoxical isn't. It's a description of how things should be. Then I've moved forward. And I think this is what Hegel to a large extent achieves in his
allowing the paradox in your world, or expecting it, or even seeing the necessity of it. Is that what you mean? Of the
exactly
paradox? Not as a problem, not as a logical problem.
Exactly, yeah, as a description of reality. And this is where I can bring in this bit that I said I might talk about Kant and this von Gleich figure, because so in the first chapter there, he's introducing this idea of worldviews. He makes the case more or less that any duality can be understood as being too attached to one particular worldview. And and it was really beautiful for me, because thanks to our conversations about Kant, I'd been really digging into this a priori problem. What's going on there? And I'm trying to ask myself the question, but to what extent is Kant reflecting reality, and to what extent is he creating limits to knowledge? And so in this book, in the first chapter there, he talks about how Kant's mathematical ability, his deep knowledge, and we could apply this out generally to mathematicians. If I have a deep mathematical understanding of the world, that means it's likely to be the primary lens through which I see everything. I quantify everything, and that in itself only becomes dangerous if I try to make it the only truth rather than a perspective on the truth. And so in this chapter, I can, after I finished translating it, I can send you the beginning. Yeah. Okay. And then he compares this to Leibniz.
I just need to plug in my computer. Sorry, just to go on.
Yeah, sure. He compares this to Leibniz, who was also a phenomenal mathematician, but wasn't limited by his mathematism, his mathematical abilities, and he developed this whole system of monadology, of qualities, of essential qualities of being, which have nothing mathematical about them. So let's translate this into very simple, ready, easy to understand. A mathematician can go as far to deny the color red. So it's just a wavelength. It's just a fiction of your brain. It's not a real experience. And that's, you hear so many people doing that because they are too gifted in one direction and don't understand that they've blinded themselves to the real agential quality of redness. And Steiner will actually describe this as mechanical occultism. It's this idea of, I have to create something, and this is what Kant is doing essentially, to a certain extent, something beyond my experience. Wavelengths they are the true basis of reality, but I only experience them as color. But it's really the wavelengths that are, and the frequency that are the truth, which is so close to the Ding an sich. This is also this other occult, hidden aspect which we can never arrive at.
Do you think the Ding an sich is close to the chaos that Steiner trying to point us to? I mean, I
think it's one way for me of describing it is that Kant had, it's an anti-fear mechanism. To come back to what you were
Yeah.
saying, there is something there. I have to push it away. I don't want to know it.
Mm.
I have to tell myself, and it's the type of language he's using in this meditation, isn't it? I have to find logical justifications to support my irrational fear, and it can be an unconscious fear. So I create Ding an sich. I can never know it. I'm so like, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
Or putting this perhaps more in Steiner-like terms, is the spiritual world is definitely real. Kant isn't ready to enter consciously in there. He's coming up to his own limits of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And the rest of the world is in a similar state. So they take on board Kant as like saying, yep, we can't know about all of this. This is all woo. This is all supernatural. There's no reality. It's all subjective. And we provide Kant to argue our point of view. And Steiner will say is like, yeah, you are using rationale to support it's like a deep held fear that again like ties in beautifully to this experience of like being stuck in this world and wanting to return back to it's like me, normal Rick.
Can I elaborate a little bit on that? Because
yeah.
Well, or on that, or on my own thoughts. Because when I said about what I said about the chaos being the Ding an sich. So what happens to me if I trying to imagine indeed this world before the knowing, which is I think a little bit indeed. I think there is a parallel to the Ding an sich, which is like the thing. Well, some kind of an essence, or like it's not touched by the humans yet, or something. So it's independent of human knowledge. What I realize when I'm trying to do this exercise is that I realize that okay, so I cannot reach there. So actually, I also start to doubt then about the existence at all of this thing. So I see that it's not it's dependent on me, so to say. So and I think that may be one of the reasons that you can ask yourself, why is Steiner both in GA2 and also here, why is he starting with this? It's clearly not something that we can reach with philosophical abstract thinking. So most philosophers will say, okay,
just pointing at it, like you were saying.
Most philosophers will say, okay, this is some kind of thinking exercise. It's just But at least with the thing, what do you? If you would see this in thinking exercise, what's the result of this thinking exercise? It is that basically we cannot know anything about the world outside our knowing, basically. So this is basically what we have. So the fundamental nature of knowing of knowing, basically, that is basically one of the results of this exercise. Don't you agree? So that kind of like it does the opposite almost as what. So he's trying to come up. Yeah,
he's pulling the rug. He's encouraging us to pull our own rug from under us, under ourselves, in our rigid philosophical thinking, which again is so close to well-known Eastern methods for achieving enlightenment.
Yeah, hey, and for today, I still want to make another step. If you have more time,
sure.
We can talk for another half an hour, because there's a very important next step in this chapter, which I would also like to read a little bit about. So basically, he takes some time to describe this world, and I think that's what we also talked about. He does it in GA2 also more thoroughly. But then he continues with the next step. So given this, chaos, so to say, that we can point towards. He says, if a theory of knowing starts from the assumption that everything just mentioned is the content of our consciousness, then the question immediately arises of how we get from mere consciousness to knowledge of being. So, mere consciousness, he basically means our consciousness of the world without the knowing yet be involved. Some kind of like consciousness of the chaos in the extreme sense. Although we cannot do that, but that's what he's pointing towards. Where is the springboard? How we get from mere consciousness to knowledge of being, to being aware of being. Where is the springboard that leads us from the subjective to the transsubjective? For me, the matter is completely different. For me, consciousness and the I ID are initially only parts of the immediately given, and what relationship the former has to the latter is only a result of cognitive awareness. We do not want to determine cognition from consciousness, but vice versa. Consciousness and the relationship between subjectivity and objectivity is determined by cognition. Since we initially isolate the given without any predicates, we must ask how we even arrive at the characterization of it. How is it possible to begin the activity of knowing? How can we designate one part of the worldview, for example, as perception, and another part as concept, one as being, the other as appearance, one as cause, another as effect? How can we separate ourselves from the objective and regard ourselves as I compared to the not I? Then I would like to read on a little bit if you find it.
Yeah.
We must find a bridge from the given worldview to the one we developed through our knowing. The difficulty is that so long as we just passively stare at what is given, we cannot find a fundamental starting point to build on which to continue to develop knowledge. We would have to find a place somewhere in the given where we can intervene, where there is something of the same nature as cognition. If everything were entirely just given, then it would have to be a matter of simply staring out into the external world and a completely equivalent staring into the world of our individuality. We could then at most describe things as external, but never understand them. Our concepts only have a purely external connection to what they refer to, not an internal one. For true knowing, everything depends on us finding an area somewhere in the given where our knowing activity not only presupposes something given, but actually stands in the middle of the given. In other words, it must turn out, especially when we strictly adhere to what is merely given, that not everything is just given. Our prerequisite, through its strict adherence, must partially cancel itself out. We set it up so that we do not arbitrarily fix any beginning of the theory of knowing, but truly seek it out. Everything can be the given in this sense, even what is not given in its innermost nature. It then only appears to us formally as a given, but upon closer inspection, it reveals itself to what it really is. And then he comes to his postulate. Mm-hmm. This is the second point of my epistemology. So the first point being the pointing towards the world before the knowing. The second being the postulate that there must be something in the realm of the given where our activity does not float in the void, where the content of the world itself is the active agent. So it's kind of like dense language and abstract, but I think you read it before, and you probably can imagine something.
Absolutely.
And he later on says, well, this point is actually concepts and ideas are this nature of reply and satisfy the second postulate. But my first as critical philosophical abstract thinking comment to this is that, okay, there is an assumption underlying here, and the assumption is that that knowing is actually possible. Because if you don't assume that knowing is possible, then this postulate is not necessary, namely that there should be a point where knowing can start. So Steiner, I think there is an underlying assumption here, which I'm not sure whether he admits that, or he's not explicit about it. But do you agree with that? That if you don't assume that knowing is possible, you can just remain with the world that he points us to, and with us just staring there blindly. It feels like more indeed like how a plant experiences the world, which is kind of like experiences the world but do not internalize it, something like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, and he's very clear about that. Certainly, can't remember from 3, but in Philosophy of Freedom, he talks about transcendentalism and transcendental illusionism. It's like this simple idea that this is a philosophical perspective. So like everything is subjective illusion, and he gives them like labels. Obviously, he says, I don't represent that. I choose another one, but I would say that he does clearly recognize that Steiner am assuming that knowledge is possible, like true knowledge. Let's call it true knowledge.
But is this? And I think I agree, because more from a phenomenological perspective, that if you just see what there is in the world, you can say that we know some things and we do not know some other things. But still, it's an assumption. It's kind of like a starting point. Like he is kind of like commenting on Kant, like, yeah, you cannot not have any presuppositions, so to say. So if you really want to start an epistemology from scratch, right? You don't want to inject assumptions which are not being verified, so to say, or being checked at before anything, right? And here it feels to me that there is still one assumption, which is that there is an unknown world, which is the chaos he points us towards, and there is a point where knowing starts. And yeah, are these assumptions like justified?
So again, going on memory, it's justifying it. I'm not sure whether I can. That's not the word I would use.
Are they necessary or something? Like, is this the way to come to an objective epistemology, so to say? Because he claims that he wants to get there, right? He claims that for example, Kant has some assumptions which he did not basically check, and then he tries to get rid of assumptions basically. But I feel there is still an assumption underlying it, and I'm not saying it's a wrong assumption, but I say maybe we cannot do without it. And maybe the most simple assumption is indeed that there is, because epistemology is about knowing, right? But if you have an assumption there that knowing is possible, is not epistemology about the question about whether knowing is possible at all? So if you start,
but I see the theory. Epistemology, as in it's like a theory of knowledge. It's like what is knowledge in the context of experience, and so Kant's answer to that question is it's like we've got we create all these. In us live all of these categories, and we divide the world up into that. So he's just like saying, this is us, and we project all of this stuff onto the world. Very simplistically, that's what Kant is saying, which creates a whole series of problems for sort of like the question of truth. But that's what he's saying knowledge is: subjective projection. Do you agree? And Steiner is where was I going to go? Because which way do I go there? So how might Steiner say, to a certain extent, Kant is right? To the extent that we are the creators of these concepts, or that they are a creation of ourselves to understand the world, that is substantially true. Somebody who doesn't think about the world does not understand the world.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that Stein is trying to confront is that this subjectivity means that there's no truth there. You can't talk about true knowledge. So let's reframe it. So Kant says subjective knowledge is true, therefore absolute truth is not.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Steiner is saying, look, but if we actually look at what thinking itself is, then we can the idea that thinking is purely subjective actually has to be revisited. And what we find is that thinking is an organ, just like the eye perceives light. Thinking perceives the essential connections between the essential logics, like underlying experience. So when you were talking about when we have the given, we don't have the whole given. So take our mathematician as an example there. So the person who has no mathematical training is not able to see the mathematical relationships that are governing a certain whatever event, or it's like let's call it a chemical reaction, for example. They can't see it. It's like that, the mathematical truths that are embedded in there, and that's not because they're not there. It's like in reality, it's just that they haven't cultivated in themselves, so like the skills, the abilities, the thinking capacity to see what is already there. Mm-hmm. And this is this division that's happened with us. It's very easy for us to think of, when I see the outside world, I see the whole. And what Steiner is saying is, like, my words, is imagine you've got a sixth sense, and that sixth sense is called your thinking. And your thinking allows you to see what perception will never, ever be able to see. And that this is what knowledge is. It's connecting. It's like what the senses see with the essence or the relationships that are inherent in what you're seeing, but always remain outside of your consciousness until you integrate, so like the thinking that belongs there. Mm. And that is a theory of knowledge in the sense that it makes sense of what we're trying to do when we actually want to understand something. We are uniting the spiritual with its manifestation. That which is invisible, it's like for the senses, is visible for thinking. But also, if I just have the conceptual, then I don't see how it can be manifest in reality. Mm-hmm. And that's the way I understand a theory of knowledge. When I say I know something, what is it I am actually saying? What I'm saying is the invisible relationships that are real and present, but invisible to pure perception, I have brought them to meet each other so that the one explains the other. Mm. They live, instead of living in two worlds, they are united in me. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this key idea of when I'm looking at the world, there is a not given to everything in the world that I experience with my senses, which can only be attained through thinking. And most importantly, it can't be obtained just by repeatedly. So this is the point I was making to Carsten. No, sorry. So I'm thinking about, and I go, no, wrong. Forget this. Forget that. So Steiner will say something along the lines of, I could see an infinite number of triangles, but if I didn't think, I would never unite all of those triangles into the single concept of a triangle. They would just be, it's like a million different impressions, rather than a million impressions which are all united under the concept of triangle as expressions of a concept, spiritual truth. So that's why the question that seems to be problematic for you about is he assuming things, I don't experience it as a problem, because I'm understanding a theory of knowledge to mean, what does it actually mean to know something at all? That's what I'm understanding a theory of knowledge to mean.
Yeah, that's. I mean, so the result of this book and also of GA2, of his epistemology, it actually it works for me. So so this is also important for philosophy. Like, what is it actually? What is the result? But now I think of it, is that in GA2, I think he comes to this point in a much more natural way, actually. And in a Goethean way, in a more phenomenological way. And that can help me maybe here. There he just says, okay, he starts with the experience, basically. And that
Folkert, and the postman who comes.
No, this is following, this is not in GA2, I think.
Oh, okay, sorry.
No, he starts with, in GA2, he starts with the experience, basically. He starts to saying, we have basically an outer experience and an inner experience, which is thinking. Like he starts with this, basically. This is his starting point, and this is not it's more a Goethean way towards it. So it's more phenomenologically. He just takes what he observes as a starting point, I would say, because that's what we got, right? So it's not. It's more really based on, okay, what am I? What do I have to work with? And that's basically the experience from the outer world. And okay, there is also an inner world, but I can, in the extreme way, I can also see that as an experience. So in the end, everything is experience, and that is basically
exactly.
Yeah. So that's kind of like also a starting point of an epistemology, right? And you can say, well, you can say, is this an assumption? Well, no, this is just what we have. So it's like it's kind of like a justified, in that sense, justified assumption, right?
And importantly, grounded in the scientific method.
Yeah,
in the sense that you are observing,
empirically. You mean it's like
it's empirical, exactly. That's right. I'm not doing what Kant did and saying that how are a priori synthetic statements possible, which requires a lot of assumptions to serve as a basis of a theory of knowledge. Instead, Steiner is saying, so being empirical and saying, okay, let's start with let's start with experience, and we discover that experience is a mixture of our thoughts about things and other experiences as well, and we need to separate those out.
No, so the next step is that, so we have this experience, and then I would say the next observation, so to say, to remain with the, okay, we have to deal with what we have,
Yeah.
is that in this experience, some things are known to us and some things are unknown. And that is basically then, you could say, that's the next assumption, right? But you can also say, well,
Assumption or experience?
well, that is the thing. Like, is it because that was my problem? I say that was my problem with the previous statement I made. Like, is this an assumption that is justified? But if this assumption follows from just like the fact that we have experience is not an assumption. No, it's just the fact. It's just there. It's just what we have to play with. If then the next step is that we can also, just as naturally as we accept that there is experience, that then within this experience there is something known and something unknown as a kind of a natural given. Then just simply, we don't say anything yet about how much is unknown or how much is known, just these simple facts that something is known and something is unknown. That, I think, that is basically what he's trying to do in this chapter as well. And trying to keep it completely minimal in that sense. Just like, can we agree about this basic things?
Yes.
And then I can basically get along. Although it's based on, you have to realize that you choose this path, basically, right? There may be other paths as well, but I think it's a path. And what I started with is that to say this path results for me in a fruitful model, or whatever you want to call it. You can call it a model, or I think it's still some kind of model, but
yeah,
model that works for me, apparently, because it did result in, it sparked something in me, really. And actually, by revisiting this model, because I read this now for the whatever how many times, and I do this with this group, I actually can, with my abstract thinking, I can become quite critical towards it. That's what I just ended up with. And this is kind of like justified from some perspective. So that was also for me an interesting experience, that I could really become critical. And I think that's also needed, actually, as Steiner would encourage that.
Absolutely.
And for
critical
me,
idealism isn't... Yeah. It is a waking up from naive realism.
Yeah.
But to think it's the last word in the story, that if you believe that, then you're Kantian. But if you think that there's something beyond that, then you're moving beyond critical idealism.
Yeah. No. So I'm actually so I had an interesting experience that although it resulted in a lot of it sparked a lot of good things for me, this whole epistemology from Steiner. And when I read it last year or 3 years ago, and this time, for the first time, I start to really be so critical, to the extent that I start also to doubt, like, well, from a certain perspective, you really criticize it, and indeed say, okay, well, Steiner also makes assumptions. Like the same way Steiner criticizes Kant, you can really also criticize Steiner. I think that's important, actually. Only what for me is important, that actually, if I try to, what is actually the most important is actually what I said, that the model works for me. So I don't really care. Of course, I care that you can criticize it, but I think this criticizing is just part of the abstract thinking, element of it.
It creates an even firmer foundation on which to stand, because you've assessed it critically.
Yeah.
It's not just a hope or a belief. It's something that you've thoroughly examined.
Yeah.
And you know better what you're standing on.
Yeah, and then even a more important point, which I doubted, and which is actually even more crucial in Steiner's work, is that the next step that he makes with this postulate, that he says, okay, we find this element in our thinking that he says that is needed. We find it in ideas and concepts, because that is something that we produce. So there is nothing hidden there. we are in completely. So it's not a given from the outside. It's a given. It's still a given, but it's a given from the inside that has no
It
mystery.
requires my volition.
It requires my presence. Also, it cannot occur without me. But also, there is nothing hidden. Eh? So the given,
Yes.
and you can also criticize that. And yesterday, I had a kind of an epiphany there, or an insight with the group, because I started to criticize this. I said, yeah, even if most simple concept, like the concept of a circle, or the concept of the number one,
Yeah.
like I can let it arise in me, but there will always be mysteries about this concept. I never know everything about the concept. So how can I say that how can this be justified, and how can I agree with Steiner that an idea in me that arises in me has no secrets for me, or is nothing there is nothing hidden there. But then one of the people there said, yeah, it's not about the fact that this idea is complete. So it doesn't matter whether your idea about oneness or the circle is complete. It's more that the fact that what you think about it is complete in itself. So it's transference for you, and it's complete by itself. So it's I'm still working on it, but maybe you get the tension here. Or
if I've understood correctly what you're trying to say, would, if I describe it like this, is you can sort of like say whether I've got somewhere close or whether I'm completely off the mark. When a concept can be deepened immeasurably, I can sort of like just see a circle as a mathematical figure, but then I can bring the circle in relation to
mythology
how,
or symbolism, or
exactly, or Niccolo Cusano is really interesting in this field, but it can become even richer than that. It's not. It's the opposite of a. In a way, it's in the opposite of a truth. It's something. It's like literature. You can read it one day and suddenly you can interpret the text in a certain way, and then the next day you read it and you pick up a different detail. It was all there in the beginning, but you've decided to focus on it's like another part, and then the next day you focus on yet another part. So what was always there in the beginning in that text, it's like day by day by day by day, thanks to your own revisiting of it, it grows. So the life that is inherent in the circle or the text that is at the root of it, as we revisit it, that life begins to make itself apparent. It's not this static idea of a circle is a circle. It's a circle is a lot of things, and it is actually a living idea, and it comes to life in me by me revisiting it multiple times.
But can you then
is that like a little bit in line with
Steiner claims that there are ideas, and mathematical ideas are a good example because they are very close to being completely known. Steiner
fully
says,
definable, yeah.
Steiner says, so we look for an anchor in this chaos where no one starts, where nothing is hidden, where nothing is not within my insight. And he says, yeah, this starting point is in our, so in the experience we have, in all the experiences we have, a thought is something that we produce ourselves, and there is nothing hidden to it. He doesn't really says what kind of thoughts, what kind of concepts, what kind of. So I find it difficult because I think some thoughts are more easily to understand, like that it's really that there's nothing hidden, like mathematics. That's why I give the example. He doesn't distinguish between other thoughts or concepts and mathematical concepts. But if we
Mhm.
just take a mathematical concept, he says that this is the starting point of knowledge, because it is not.
It's not my subjective activity that determines what's going on in this. It's
Well, no, the most important thing I would say is that nothing is hidden. So if we look at the outside world and we look at the tree, it's obvious that we have a concept of the tree. But first of all, we cannot look inside the tree. We don't know what its roots are. We don't even know the evolution of the tree. So it's clear that this is, again, the polarity between the known and the unknown, right? So there is something known about a tree, but there's a lot of things unknown. Steiner says we need to have an anchor. We need to identify something that is completely known to us. And he says we can find that in the idea itself. So the idea itself is completely known to us. So we start to observe the idea, right? The object, the subject becomes the object. But then, well, can we agree with Steiner that indeed there is nothing unknown about an idea? That is basically my question. Or is that obvious for you? So for me, this was not obvious, but I start to understand a little bit what he means by it. And it doesn't mean that you know everything about the circle, but it means that the moment that you think about the circle, the concept circle, and that moment in time is completely known to you. So if you know what I mean, that is what he means. He doesn't mean that you have to know everything about the circle. No, observe your idea of the circle. That's the step you have to make. So it's kind of, if you know what I mean.
So yes, I understand what you're saying, but I think I've lost the thread of why you're saying
this is the exceptional state. Don't you agree? This is what I'm pointing at least. So maybe you can link it to your understanding of this exceptional state. But for me, this is really at the core of Steiner's epistemology, that this state actually exists. And maybe it's so obvious. Maybe it's so obvious to you that you don't recognize my struggle anymore.
Perhaps that's right. One thing you have done, and perhaps we can revisit this conversation in a couple of weeks, is it was interesting that you specifically used the word exceptional state there, because Jeff, it's the term that he's used several times in our conversations in the meditation group. And when he said it, so it's somehow it's not. It didn't gel. It didn't rhyme properly with me. And obviously, I don't want to confront him, but it would be interesting to have a conversation full of descriptions of what do we understand? What are our different understandings of what this exceptional state is?
Mm-hmm.
And perhaps, this is being hinted at due to your description, is perhaps this is also something that we really begin to experience on different levels. So this exceptional state is something the experience of it can be deepened.
Yeah, so what I do is maybe trying to approach it from the philosophical side to define it, the exceptional state.
Mm-hmm.
And you can probably also have different angles to get to it. That's probably what you mean also. And for you, maybe it means much more than just a philosophical concept. Is that right?
Yeah, I think it's a recognition. So one of the key sentences in the whole of the philosophy of freedom for me is, I live by the grace of thinking. The idea that I wouldn't even know I existed. I would exist, but I wouldn't even know I existed if I didn't have the gift of thinking. So it's a more experiential, as opposed to like fleshing it out. This idea is so profound. It's like it touches me right at the root. I wouldn't even know I existed if I couldn't think.
Mm.
And that's where I feel. So that's where the mystery of thinking really sinks in for me. And then the exceptional state is a waking up to this activity, how it impacts my life and the world. It's like in all these different ways. So that becomes and that doesn't mean that I can't appreciate what you're saying about it, but I gravitate more to what is the personal experience of thinking. So perhaps if I'm looking for links, it's like I'm beginning to think that's like this, where Fichte sets das Ich, so like it establishes the I. So perhaps I'm living in the forcefulness of that.
Well,
as my starting point. Interesting conversation to have.
Yes, because now you're actually bringing in the I, and that is, I would say, that's also more related to later work of Steiner, but also in the philosophy of freedom, he's not saying so much about the I think. So he's more approaching it from a philosophical point of view. But if you apply the exceptional state to the I think that's when you are where you are, and then it becomes more indeed transformative. Not only transformation of the thinking, but also transformation of the self. Probably, I think maybe that is
what is this whole game of life type of thing.
Yeah.
Question. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think I need to leave now. And I'm also, I said everything I want to say, I think, and I think it was a very
rich conversation.
Very
Thank
nice
you.
conversation.